Welcome to Dusky Lore. Close your eyes, dim the lights, and listen closely as the shadows begin to speak. Story 1. I have always believed in creating a sense of peace in my home. As a yoga instructor, my backyard was my sanctuary, a place where I could unwind and practice in private. I had carefully set it up over the years, adding potted plants, string lights, and a small koi pond. By March 2023, it was perfect. Every morning and every evening, I would roll out my mat on the soft grass, surrounded by flowers and the quiet sounds of nature. It felt like my own world, safe, untouched. But all of that changed in the span of a single afternoon. It was a Wednesday. The weather was perfect. A clear blue sky and sunlight so warm, it felt as if spring had arrived early. In the morning, I had a private student, but the rest of the day was free, so I decided to spend the afternoon organizing the garden shed. The shed sat in the farthest corner of my property. There was nothing special about it, just a place where I stored tools, gardening supplies, and 1,000 odds and ends. Still, every spring I made it a goal to empty it out, organize the shelves, and throw away what I no longer needed. At first, everything went well. I put on music and got to work, pulling out rusty shovels and rearranging pots. About an hour in, I was about to move a heavy toolbox from the lower shelf. As I shifted it, something slid out from behind it and fell to the floor. At first, I thought it was a battery or some kind of gadget, but when I picked it up, I felt my stomach tighten. It was a small black camera. I stared at it for a second, trying to understand what I was holding. It was sleek and modern, like those mini spy cameras you see in movies. My first thought was that it had to be some old piece of technology my ex-boyfriend had left behind. He loved gadgets. But then I noticed a tiny blinking light. The camera was still on. A cold uneasiness ran through me as I turned it over in my fingers. I had not been around there in weeks. Who would leave a camera running in my shed? I opened a small cover on the back. It had a memory card. Curiosity won over my nerves, and I rushed back into the house with the camera, inserted the card into my laptop, and the folder opened immediately. When I played the first video, I felt my skin go cold. It was me. The image was grainy but clear. There I was, on my mat, moving through poses in the middle of my garden. With my stomach in knots, I started going through the files. There were dozens, different times of day, different clothes. Some were from early morning, with the sun barely rising behind me. Others were at sunset when the patio lit up in shades of orange and pink. And then I saw something that made my hands shake. A video of me sitting on the back porch, with my legs tucked under me, drinking tea and talking on the phone. It was from last week. The reality hit me like a weight. Someone had been watching me, not only while I practiced yoga, but also in my quiet moments when I believed I was alone. I closed the laptop and sat in silence, stunned, mentally replaying every moment I had spent outside over the past month. I had always felt so comfortable there, so sure that the tall fences and thick hedges protected me from the world. Now that illusion had vanished. Someone had violated my space, and the worst part was that I did not know who. After a few minutes, I forced myself to act. I marched back to the shed, determined to search every last corner. My hands were trembling as I pulled boxes off the shelves and looked behind the tools. Nothing. I checked the lattice, the fence line, and even the koi pond. Still nothing. But when I turned toward the back corner of the yard, something caught my attention. The fence. One section of the wooden boards looked slightly out of place. The angle was odd, as if someone had tried to force them open and then put them back in a hurry. I got closer and crouched down, shining my flashlight along the crack. There were faint marks in the dirt, as if someone had climbed over. My whole body buzzed with tension. My yard was not as private as I had believed. Once inside, I started pacing around the living room, not knowing what to do. Call the police? What was I going to say? Someone hid a camera in my shed, but I do not know when or who. I chose to lock every door and window, pull the curtains all the way closed, and sleep with a heavy wrench beside the bed. The next morning, I packed up the camera, put the memory card in a Ziploc bag, and drove straight to the police station. I felt ridiculous explaining it to the officer at the front desk, as if I were exaggerating. But as soon as I showed her the videos, her expression became unmistakably serious. She took my information and said they would investigate. What followed were some of the longest days of my life. I jumped at every sound outside, peeked through the blinds over and over, and constantly checked the locks. I even stopped practicing yoga. My backyard now felt like a stage where I had been performing without knowing it. A few days later, the police called me. The officer's voice was calm, but what she told me hit me like a punch. "We traced the camera back to your next-door neighbor," she said. "He was sneaking into your yard at night to place it. We found additional material on his computer." "Additional material?" I asked in a voice that sounded distant, as if it were not mine. "Yes. It looks like he has been doing this for months, recording you whenever you were outside. We will be charging him with harassment, trespassing, and invasion of privacy." I do not remember much of what I said after that. All I know is that I hung up and collapsed onto the couch, staring silently at the wall. My neighbor, the man I had greeted so many times, who smiled at me over the fence while watering his garden. I had never given him a second thought. The police confiscated his equipment, and he moved out a week later. But my sanctuary no longer existed. Every time I went out into the yard, I felt exposed, vulnerable. I installed security cameras on every corner of the house and replaced the old wooden fence with a taller, reinforced one. I even adopted a large, loud dog just in case. For months, I could not relax there. Even when my friends came over and we sat on the porch laughing and talking, I caught myself looking toward the fence with that creeping feeling that someone was watching me. Almost a year has passed, and although the yard is starting to feel a little like home again, I will never see it the same way. I still practice yoga, but only indoors, where I can lock the door and close the blinds. I have accepted that you can never fully know the people around you, not the smiling neighbor, and not the kind stranger. Sometimes the people who inspire the most trust are the ones hiding the darkest secrets. And sometimes the places that seem safest can be anything but. Story 2. I have always taken pride in being the kind of person who gets along with his neighbors. You lend a lawnmower here, keep an eye on someone's house when they go on vacation there. It keeps the neighborhood from feeling like just a collection of houses. When my neighbor on the left moved out and the place sat empty for months, it felt strange, as if something was missing from the usual rhythm of life. So when a guy named Todd moved in at the beginning of May 2021, I was happy to introduce myself. Todd was around my age, mid-30s, maybe a little younger. He was friendly from the start, that perfect balance between talkative and polite. We shook hands, and I learned that he was between jobs and looking to make a fresh start in Raleigh. He said something vague about having moved from New York, but I did not press him. People move for 1,000 different reasons. I offered to help him with some boxes, and he politely declined, saying he had it under control. Over the next few weeks, Todd seemed like a good guy. He would wave when I pulled into the garage, ask how my day had gone, and even compliment the work I had done in my yard. One Saturday morning, he came over while I was cleaning out the garage. "Wow, man," he said, looking at my shelves. "You have every tool anyone could ever need." I laughed and did not think much of it. Comes with being a homeowner. You never know what project is coming next. Then Todd asked if he could borrow a drill. He had some shelves to hang, he said, nothing major. I have lent tools to plenty of people, so I gave it to him. A couple of days later, he returned it with a thanks and a smile. Looking back, it was all so casual. Nothing set off any alarms. But a month later, I started noticing small things. At first, it was vague. A wrench I could have sworn I had put back in the toolbox was not there when I needed it. A pair of work gloves I had left on the bench disappeared. I assumed I had misplaced them. It was not as if the place was spotless. One night, though, I went to grab a stepladder from the backyard shed and found the door slightly open. I was sure I had latched it earlier that same day. Nothing looked disturbed, but I froze. I told myself it must have been the wind, or maybe I had not closed it all the way. Then Todd's behavior started to change. He still acted friendly, but he began showing up more often. He would knock on my door just to chat, staying longer than felt natural. Once he asked what time I usually left for work in the mornings, which struck me as odd. "Just curious, man," he said with an easy smile. "I wanted to see if you needed help with that fence you're fixing. I'm usually around in the mornings." Something about that did not sit right with me. Who pays that kind of attention to someone else's schedule? One afternoon after getting home from work, I decided to check the garage thoroughly. I did not tell anyone, but I had started to feel paranoid, like I needed to make sure everything was still where it belonged. I went through the shelves carefully. It was not my imagination. A couple of things were missing. My ratchet set was gone, and so was a flashlight that had been hanging from a hook. I did not want to believe it was Todd. He had been so nice. But the more I thought about it, the more suspicious it seemed. I decided to bring it up if the opportunity came casually, just to see how he reacted. The opportunity came sooner than expected. That night I could not sleep. Around 2 a.m, I got up to get a glass of water. My kitchen window looks out over the backyard, and as I stood there, I noticed movement among the trees near the edge of my property. At first, I thought it was an animal, a raccoon or maybe a stray dog. But then I saw a figure moving toward Todd's house. He was carrying something large and heavy, though the moonlight was not enough to make out what it was. I narrowed my eyes and then I saw him clearly. It was Todd. I stood there for a long moment, staring. Why was he sneaking around in the middle of the night, and what was he carrying? The next morning I decided to confront him. I waited until I saw him on his porch with a cup of coffee, as if everything were normal. I walked over with a calm expression and a friendly tone. "Hey Todd, weird question," I said. "You would not happen to know anything about some tools that have gone missing, would you? I have noticed a few things out of place in my garage." Todd's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered. "No, man, I have not seen anything. I have enough to deal with unpacking boxes." There was something in his tone that sounded wrong. Too casual, too quick. "Are you sure? You were out late last night, weren't you?" I added, watching him closely. His expression tightened. "What is that supposed to mean?" "I just noticed you coming back from somewhere carrying something heavy." For a second he said nothing. Then he forced a smile, but the emptiness in his eyes gave him away. "You're mistaken, man. I was home all night." I knew he was lying. That afternoon I decided enough was enough. I called the owner of the house next door and explained that I was concerned about my new neighbor. The landlord's answer chilled me. "Neighbor? I have not rented that house yet." "What do you mean you have not rented it? Someone is living there right now." He introduced himself as Todd. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Sir, no one should be in that house. I will come by tomorrow with the police to check it." That night I could not stop looking out the windows. expecting to see Todd staring back at me. In the morning, the police and the owner arrived, and we knocked on the door of the house next door. No one answered. When the officers forced the lock and went inside, the truth came pouring out. Todd, or whatever his real name was, had vanished. The house was practically empty, except for a pile of stolen items in the basement. My ratchet set, my flashlight, and tools I had assumed were lost. There were also things that clearly belonged to other neighbors: a bicycle, some power tools, and even a jewelry box. The officer said he had probably been squatting in the house illegally for months, using it as a base to steal around the area. They found signs that he had been coming and going through the back door, sometimes crossing my property to avoid the main street. I do not know where Todd ended up. The police filed a report, but as far as I know, they never found him. I spent the next week installing new locks on everything: the house, the garage, the shed. I even put up security cameras. I am still friendly with my neighbors, but I will never trust someone that quickly again. Todd played me perfectly. He seemed harmless, helpful, even like the kind of guy you would have a beer with. But it was all an act. And the most unsettling thing is how well he knew how to perform it. Story 3. When I first moved into my apartment in Portland, I fell in love with it instantly. It was one of those old, charming places: hardwood floors, crown molding, and those vintage ventilation grates built into the walls. The kind of place that makes you feel like you are living inside a little piece of history. As a freelance graphic designer who works from home, I was excited to settle in, make the space my own, and enjoy the peace and quiet it offered. For the first 2 weeks, everything was perfect. I rearranged the furniture, decorated the walls, and settled into my little corner by the window, where the morning light was perfect for sketching. But after a while, I started noticing something strange. I could hear noises coming from the vents. At first, they were soft scratches or the occasional tapping sound. My mind immediately jumped to the logical explanation: mice or rats in the ducts. In old buildings like mine, pests were not unusual. It was not ideal, but it was not the end of the world either. I made a note to mention it to the landlord and tried to let it go. The noises were not constant. They would start for a few minutes and then stop completely, as if whatever was in there had disappeared. Sometimes I would catch myself at my desk, frozen, holding my breath while I listened, and heard nothing. I started convincing myself that I was imagining it. I had been stressed with deadlines and maybe I just needed a break. One night, though, I was working late, rushing through a last-minute design project for a client. Everything was silent except for the fan of my laptop. Suddenly, I heard it again. This time, it was not just scratching. It was dragging, like something moving. I turned my head toward the vent on the wall across from me. It was one of those old metal grates with small diamond-shaped openings. I could not see anything inside, only darkness. But the sound was clearer than ever. I stood up, crouched beside the vent, and leaned in to bring my ear closer. And I swear I heard a faint whisper. They were not words, not exactly, but the soft sound of breathing. The instant I moved a little closer, it stopped. My stomach dropped. I stayed rigid for a second before jumping backward and getting to my feet so quickly that I almost tripped over myself. "No, that cannot be," I muttered, trying to laugh even though my voice was shaking. "You're losing your mind." That night I went to bed with a knot in my chest. I told myself it was my imagination, that it was late, that I was tired, and that old vents make strange noises. Even so, I spent hours staring at the ceiling, listening for every sound in the apartment. For the first time since I had moved in, I did not feel safe. The next morning I called my landlord. I explained that I thought there might be mice in the ducts or something making noise. He said he would send someone to check it later. That afternoon, the technician arrived, short, rough-looking, with a thick gray beard and the kind of face that looked like he had seen everything. I told him what I had heard. "Rats, probably," he said confidently. "They love getting into ducts. They can get in easily from the crawl space or from an adjoining unit." He grabbed his tools and disappeared into the building's shared attic. I stayed at the kitchen table, drinking coffee and scrolling through my phone without paying attention, trying to ignore the tension I felt. About 30 minutes later, he came down changed. His expression was tense and he avoided looking me in the eye. "Did you find something?" I asked, setting down my cup. He hesitated. "Yes," he said slowly, scratching the back of his neck. "Someone has been tampering with the vents. The covers are loose, like they have been removed and put back on. It looks like someone has been crawling around inside." I blinked, unsure whether I had heard him correctly. "Someone?" He nodded, serious. "I think you should talk to your landlord. This is not rats." I was speechless as he packed up his tools and left. Crawling through the ducts. The thought made my skin crawl. I called my landlord immediately, and he promised to investigate. But that night I could not get the image out of my head. Someone squeezing through those dark tubes moving between the walls of the building. The next day, since I had not heard anything, I decided to investigate on my own. I went to the apartment next to mine, the one on the other side of my bedroom wall. It had always seemed empty to me. No noises, no lights. I had never paid much attention to it. I knocked on the door. Nothing. The door looked dusty, as if it had not been used in weeks. I pressed my ear against the wood, trying to catch any sign of life. Silence. That night the sounds returned. I was on the couch when I heard it again, dragging, a soft, dull thud, and then breathing. I turned off the television and the apartment became deathly quiet. The noise was coming from the vent near the floor beside the couch. I went to the kitchen for a flashlight and slowly approached the vent and aimed the beam into the darkness. At first, I saw only dust and the faint outline of the metal duct, but as I moved the light, something caught my attention. A glimmer, like the reflection of an eye. I threw myself backwards so fast that I fell to the floor, the flashlight bouncing beside me. My chest was heaving as I stared at the vent, still lit up. Nothing moved. The eye had disappeared. I did not sleep that night. I pushed the couch against the vent and left all the lights on. First thing in the morning, I called the police. I told them there was someone in the ducts, that someone was crawling through them and watching me. I sounded like a lunatic, but I did not care. When they arrived, they went up into the attic and thoroughly checked the ventilation system. They were there for more than an hour before coming back down. One of the officers asked me to sit down. "We found signs that someone has been entering and exiting the ducts," he said. "It looks like they were accessing them from an adjoining unit." I swallowed. "Which unit?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "The apartment next to yours," he said. "Your landlord confirmed it has been empty for months." The police opened an investigation and over time found the person responsible. My neighbor across the hall. He had been sneaking into the vacant apartment, getting into the ventilation system, and using it to spy on me. They found tiny holes drilled into the vent covers, just enough to look through. The man was arrested, but I could no longer stay there. I packed my things and moved out as soon as I could. To this day, I still cannot sit near a vent without looking at it nervously, and I avoid old buildings entirely. I know it sounds paranoid, but when you discover that someone has been watching you in your home, in your most private moments, it changes the way you see everything. The truth is, you never really know who is watching you, and sometimes they're closer than you think. Story 4. I always trusted Max, my 7-year-old German Shepherd, as my alarm system, my guardian, and my faithful shadow. I am a dog groomer and work long hours, but when I am home, Max does not leave my side. We live in a quiet neighborhood in Buffalo, a place where by mid-December snow covers everything in a soft silence. That silence always comforted me, until last winter, when it started to feel wrong. It began as a persistent annoyance. Max had stopped barking. Ever since I have had him, Max barked at anything unfamiliar. The mailman, squirrels, even the wind hitting the fence. That was his thing. At night especially, he patrolled the yard like clockwork. His deep bark sounded at the slightest noise. It made me feel safe, knowing he would alert me if something was not right. But last December, the barking stopped. At first, I thought he might be tired. Dogs calm down with age, right? I let it go for a few days. I was overwhelmed with the holiday rush at work. It felt like I was grooming every golden retriever and doodle in Buffalo, and I barely had time to think. Still, every time I let Max out at night, I noticed that he would stand still staring at the fence instead of walking along it the way he always had. He would sniff the air a little, his tail low, and then come back inside without making a sound. I remember joking to myself, "Are you retiring early, huh, Max?" But deep down, something did not fit. A week passed, and then came the night I decided to check the cameras. I had a basic security system. 2 motion sensor cameras aimed at the yard, one near the back porch and another by the gate. Until then, they had only caught raccoons. I did not expect to see anything. I just wanted to check whether Max was reacting to something I could not hear. After 11 p.m., I settled onto the couch with my laptop and opened the recordings. Max had been acting strange again earlier, staring at the fence, coming back inside, not a single bark. The live feed showed nothing unusual, snow falling in heavy flakes blanketing the yard. I yawned and started fast-forwarding through the videos from the past few nights. Then I saw it. In the recording from 2 nights earlier, around midnight, the motion sensor activated. I leaned toward the screen to make out the shape. A figure entered the frame. A man. My heart nearly stopped when I saw him move toward the fence, hunched over, as if trying to stay low. He stopped in the farthest corner where Max usually barked the most, and to my horror, he crouched down and slipped something through the fence. It was hard to tell what it was, but Max appeared on the screen almost immediately, approaching the stranger cautiously, his tail wagging. The man stayed there for almost a minute, his hand extended, and Max accepted it. He ate something from his hand. "What the?" I whispered to no one. The recording ended with the man fading into the darkness, leaving no trace behind, and the quiet yard covered in snow. My mind raced to catch up with what I had just seen. Someone had been in my yard. Someone had fed Max. I tried to rationalize it. An overly friendly neighbor? A well-meaning stranger leaving treats for a big dog? None of it made sense. The next morning, I took Max straight to the vet. I did not tell the receptionist much beyond. He is acting strange, and I want to make sure he is okay. When the veterinarian came back, she was frowning. "There is a sedative in his system," she told me. "It is mild, but enough to keep him calm." I felt nauseous. "What kind of sedative?" She listed a few possibilities, mainly tranquilizers used in veterinary medicine for minor surgeries, but I could barely hear her. Someone had drugged my dog. The image of the man in the video, crouched by the fence in the middle of the night, giving something to Max while I slept without knowing, hit me all at once. I already knew it was not random. Someone had done it on purpose. Who? That night I could not relax. I replayed the video on my laptop over and over, trying to figure out who the man was, what he had in his hand, where he came from, and what he wanted. Was he trying to earn Max's trust so he could enter the yard without being detected? The house? The questions spun in a loop as I obsessively watched the live feed. Around midnight, I got my answer. I turned off all the lights, leaving the room lit only by the glow of the laptop. My eyes kept moving back and forth between the screen and Max, who was sleeping at my feet. Without sedatives for the first time in days, the yard looked empty, snow falling. I started to think that maybe whoever it was had already gone away, and then the motion sensor activated. My heart lurched when the image flickered. The same man appeared, his silhouette blurred beneath the snowfall. This time he moved faster, heading straight to the same corner of the fence where Max had found him before. I could see he was carrying a small bag, the kind they give you at a pharmacy. He crouched again and slipped his hand through the fence once more. This time Max did not move. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands and remotely turned on the porch floodlights. The yard lit up all at once, the snow reflecting the light like a spotlight aimed at the intruder. He froze. His face was now visible on the camera. An older man, maybe in his 60s, with thin, messy hair sticking out from under a hat. Before I could process it, I shouted through the window, adrenaline cracking my voice. "Get out of my yard." The man flinched and looked straight at the camera, straight at me. His expression froze my blood. It was not anger or guilt. It was almost calm, as if he did not care that he had been caught. And then suddenly he turned and ran, disappearing into the night. I called the police immediately. They arrived half an hour later, their lights flashing across the snowy street. I showed them the video, my voice still trembling, trying to explain myself. The officers searched the yard and the surrounding area, but of course the man had already vanished. One of them stayed behind to talk to me. "You said he gave your dog a sedative," he asked, watching the recording over my shoulder. The vet confirmed it. Why would someone do that? Why would he feed my dog, whatever that was? The officer did not have an answer. He could only speculate. Maybe he wanted to silence Max so he could get into the yard. Maybe he intended to break into the house. "People do strange things," he sighed. "We will file a report and keep an eye out. You did the right thing by scaring him off." I tried to let his words calm me, but they sounded hollow. Keep an eye out. What does that even mean exactly? He could not promise the man would not come back, and the image of his face, calm, unbothered, remained burned into my mind. I thanked him as best I could, although inside I felt alone. I did not sleep that night even after the officers left. I stayed up watching the cameras, jumping at every flash of light. Max stayed glued to me, his ears alert, as if he were also waiting for the man to return. He never did. The neighbor, technically the guy from the street behind mine, turned out to be the one responsible. His house was a few doors down, just beyond the property behind mine. I did not see him leave, but he moved out a couple of weeks after the incident. One morning I noticed the house was empty and the "for rent" sign was back in the yard. The police never got a clear motive, though they suspected he was scouting my property to steal something. Whatever it was, all I can say is that I am glad I caught it in time. If these neighborhood nightmares give you chills, do not forget to like and subscribe for more stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. What would you do if you discovered your neighbor was not who they seem to be? Share your thoughts in the comments. I would love to know how you would handle it. Send this video to that friend who swears their neighbors are weird. And remember, safety starts with staying alert. Keep your doors locked and trust your instincts. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next nightmare.